I thought marriage meant finally belonging somewhere, but the first time my new family gathered for photos, I felt invisible. Amanda, my sister-in-law, placed her arm around my husband and nudged me out of the frame with a smile so polished no one else noticed. My heart pounded, yet I stayed silent, letting their laughter echo like nails on glass. Just as the photographer lifted his camera, he looked straight at me. "We'll start with her in the center," he said. The room froze. For the first time, their masks slipped, and I realized the game had just begun. When I first married Daniel, I told myself this was the beginning of a warm, secure chapter of my life. He'd always been gentle, steady, the kind of man who seemed untouched by the arrogance that sometimes came with wealth. I wanted to believe his family was an extension of that goodness. Their house, sprawling and polished, hummed with the sound of champagne flutes clinking and laughter drifting from gilded rooms. To an outsider, it looked like a picture of harmony. To me, it felt like walking into a theater where everyone had already been given a script but me. Amanda, my sister-in-law, greeted me with a practiced smile. Her words were wrapped in honey but sharpened like glass underneath. "Jennifer, that dress looks brave." "Not everyone could pull off something so bold," she said, the tilt of her head suggesting it was not a compliment at all. I laughed lightly, pretending not to hear the thorns in her tone, though I felt the sting in my chest. She squeezed my hand a little too tightly, her manicured nails pressing into my skin as if to remind me of my place. The evening flowed like a performance rehearsed to perfection. My mother-in-law moved among the guests with calculated grace, every smile landing where it would win her favor. Amanda floated from one cluster to another, whispering just loud enough for me to catch fragments of words. "Lucky. Doesn't quite fit. We'll see." The words hung in the air like invisible hooks, tugging at my nerves. When the photographer called for the family to gather, I breathed deeply. This was supposed to be the moment, the picture that proved I was one of them, a rightful branch on their gilded tree. I positioned myself beside Daniel, my hand resting on his arm. Then Amanda slid in with a dazzling smile, tugging Daniel closer to her side. Her elbow brushed mine, her body angling me toward the edge of the frame. In that subtle gesture, she erased me, yet made it look like a coincidence. I felt the sting of humiliation burn through my chest, but I kept my smile frozen. My silence, I realized, was the only weapon I had in that instant. The photographer lifted his camera, squinting as he adjusted his angle. Before he clicked, Amanda's lips curved into a victorious grin, a grin meant only for me. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes to stay steady on the lens, though inside I felt the ground tilt beneath me. For the first time since the wedding began, I wondered if I had made a mistake trusting this family's embrace. Later that evening, I slipped away from the crowd, seeking a moment of quiet in the hallway lined with heavy portraits. That was when I heard voices seeping through a half-open door. I paused, breath shallow. Amanda's voice was sharp, stripped of its sugary coating. "She's not part of us, she's just a placeholder. Daniel will wake up eventually." My stomach dropped. Another voice, my mother-in-law's, lower but just as cutting. "Let her play house for now. She won't last." The words sliced deeper than any public slight could. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching at my chest as though I could physically hold the shards of myself together. My mind reeled. I wasn't just unwelcome, they were plotting my erasure before I'd even had a chance to belong. I forced myself back into the glow of the party, my face calm, my smile measured. Every laugh I gave, every nod I offered felt like armor I was strapping on piece by piece. If they wanted me to play the role of an outsider, I would, but on my terms. When the photographer regrouped us again for another round of pictures, I stepped into position with quiet determination. Amanda attempted her maneuver once more, sliding between me and the camera, her hand tugging Daniel into her orbit. But before the shutter clicked, the photographer lowered his camera and frowned. His eyes scanned the group, then stopped directly on me. "We'll start with her in the center," he said firmly, gesturing at me. The room froze. Amanda's face faltered, her smirk collapsing into something brittle. My mother-in-law's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of cold calculation. Daniel glanced between us, confusion shadowing his expression. For a heartbeat, the carefully constructed illusion cracked wide open, and I stood in the fracture, more visible than ever. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't about photos. It was about power, and the game had only just begun. The next morning, I woke in Daniel's family home with the weight of last night pressing on my chest. Their voices still echoed in my mind. Placeholder, won't last. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Anger would only feed their narrative. No, I needed something sharper than outrage. I needed patience. So I became what they expected, the quiet, agreeable bride. At breakfast, Amanda made a performance of correcting me. "Oh, Jennifer, we don't usually add cream to our coffee here. It ruins the flavor," she said sweetly, her smile resting somewhere between pity and mockery. I nodded, stirring the cup anyway, my lips curving into an obedient smile. My silence made her bolder. She leaned closer to Daniel. "She'll learn eventually. Some habits take time." He chuckled awkwardly, and I let it pass, though each word lodged in me like splinters. Over the next days, the insults became a steady drizzle. My mother-in-law sighed when I offered to help in the kitchen. "You're our guest, dear. No need to trouble yourself." But her eyes said something else entirely. Useless. Amanda often glanced at me when guests were around, then whispered loud enough to be overheard, "She's trying, bless her heart." The guests would laugh, not realizing the bar buried beneath, but what they mistook for weakness was calculation. I smiled, I nodded, I blended into the background, while my mind cataloged every slight. Their words stacked like dry tinder. All I needed was a spark. One afternoon, when the house was empty, I slipped into the living room. The family gathered there most evenings, trading stories and wine. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small device no bigger than a button, a mini camera I had bought months before. My hand trembled slightly as I fixed it behind a shelf lined with meaningless trinkets. Its angle swept the entire room. If they wanted to perform cruelty, let them do it on stage. My stage. That night, Amanda cornered me while Daniel spoke with his uncle. She smiled for the crowd, but her voice was a whisper, meant only for me. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. You're nothing more than a pretty shadow in this family." I kept my face serene, my laugh light, though my heart pounded. The camera had caught every word. What they didn't know, what no one in this house knew, was that I was not just a wife who stumbled into fortune. Before Daniel, I had built my own career brick by brick. I was a strategic financial consultant, one of the youngest in my firm to secure high-profile clients. My work had given me more than income. It had given me leverage, accounts that ran deep, partnerships that stretched into places this family worshipped, banks, investors, names they would bow to. I had walked into this marriage with my own foundation. They had mistaken my quiet ring for dependence. It was Amanda who pushed too far. A week later, I discovered her subtle attack online. A post circulated among acquaintances, a photograph of me cropped poorly, paired with a caption dripping venom. "Money can't buy class." The comments multiplied. Some defended, many mocked. My phone buzzed with notifications, each one another twist of the knife. I didn't delete it. I didn't argue. Instead, I opened the folder I'd been keeping for days, where I saved screenshots of every whisper Amanda had let slip into the digital ether. Small jabs, sarcastic hashtags, memes crafted at my expense. One by one, they became part of my collection. Evidence. It was during this quiet archiving that I stumbled across something unexpected. A document half hidden among files Daniel had asked me to glance over. At first, I thought it was just another report about his family's company, but as I read, my pulse quickened. Debt. Staggering debt. buried beneath polished surfaces and false smiles. Their empire, the very stage on which they flaunted superiority, was crumbling, and they had hidden it carefully, hoping no one outside would see. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the figures. They saw me as powerless, but I now held the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth about their fragile kingdom. The living room camera's light blinked faintly, recording silence in an empty house. For the first time since stepping into this family's world, I felt something shift inside me. Not despair, not fear, but control. From the moment I uncovered their secret debt, the air in that house felt different. The walls no longer closed in on me. Instead, they whispered possibilities. I began to shape a plan, not of loud confrontation, but of quiet, surgical precision. If Amanda wanted a game, I would give her one, but I would write the rules. It started with small seeds. At dinner, I casually mentioned a rumor I had heard about a company collapsing under hidden debt. I spoke lightly, as if it were just another story from the financial world. Amanda's fork paused mid-air. Her eyes flicked to her mother's before she forced a laugh. "Some people are just careless with money," she said, but her voice quivered at the edges. The next day, when neighbors visited, I told a story about a friend whose family pretended to be perfect while hiding terrible secrets. I didn't name anyone, but I didn't need to. Amanda's face drained of color. She excused herself quickly, her hands trembling as she poured more wine. Each hint was a thread unraveling the tapestry she and her mother had worked so hard to weave. For the first time, Amanda began to falter. She grew restless, snapping at servants, fumbling in conversations. She forgot her lines in the perfect play she had orchestrated, and each stumble only fueled me further. Late one night, as I sat in the guest room, my phone buzzed. A message appeared from Amanda. "Stay in your lane, Jennifer. You won't survive here if you keep pushing." My chest tightened, but not from fear, from satisfaction. I let the glow of the screen reflect on my face, imagining the camera in the living room quietly recording. Amanda, in her arrogance, had chosen the worst place in the house to type her threat. She had done it while sitting beneath the very lens I had planted. The next weekend, Amanda announced a party. She framed it as a casual gathering, but I saw the gleam in her eyes. This was her battleground. She wanted me humiliated in front of friends and extended relatives, reduced to nothing more than an afterthought. Daniel seemed oblivious, though he frowned at her insistence that everyone important be there. That evening, the house buzzed with chatter and music. Amanda was radiant, commanding attention like a queen at court. She circled me with subtle barbs disguised as pleasantries. "Jennifer is still adjusting," she said sweetly to a group of women. "She means well, but these things take time." Laughter followed, sharp as knives. I sipped my wine, my expression calm. Then, as Amanda raised her glass for a toast, her phone vibrated. She glanced down, her confident smile faltering. A video file had been sent anonymously to her device. She froze, her voice catching as the screen lit up with her own image. From the speakers, no one knew whose hands had connected it. The room filled with her voice, dripping venom. "She's not part of us. She's just a placeholder. Daniel will wake up eventually." The crowd silenced. Every face turned to Amanda. Gasps rippled, then whispers spread like wildfire. Amanda's hands shook as she fumbled to stop the video, her cheeks flaming. "That's taken out of context," she stammered, but the damage was done. Eyes that once adored her now shimmered with judgment, even mockery. Someone laughed, soft, incredulous, but cruel. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched, my heart steady. For the first time, Amanda tasted the bitterness she had forced down my throat for weeks. Daniel's gaze found mine across the room. Confusion clouded his features, but behind it lingered something darker. Doubt. His eyes shifted back to Amanda, his jaw tightening. I saw the fracture forming, the line that could no longer be erased. And then, Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, my mother-in-law standing near the edge of the crowd, her expression not of shock, but of cold calculation. While everyone else reeled, she did not flinch, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze sharpening on me. For the first time, the mask slipped, and I saw the truth. Amanda had never been the true enemy. It had always been her mother. The night of the family council arrived like a storm on the horizon. Word had spread that key investors would attend, that decisions about the company's survival would be discussed in the grand dining hall. For days, Amanda and her mother had carried themselves with renewed intensity, whispering, plotting, preparing their stage. They assumed I would be silent, just another ornament at the edge of the table. I dressed carefully, not in the subdued tones they expected, but in a gown of deep emerald that caught the light with every movement. As I entered the hall, heads turned, conversations faltered. Amanda's eyes narrowed immediately, her glass pausing at her lips. My mother-in-law's smile did not break, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine. When introductions were made, I waited until the moment was perfect. Investors greeted the family with warmth, their words dripping with cautious hope. They needed reassurance, a sign of strength. That was when I stepped forward. "Perhaps I can speak to that," I said, my voice calm, unshaken. The room quieted. I laid out the truth. I was not just Daniel's wife. I was a shareholder, a silent but significant investor in a firm they had been courting for months. Papers slid across the polished table, my signature clear on contracts they had never expected me to touch. Gasps rippled. Amanda blinked rapidly, her lips parting with disbelief. The investor's eyes lit with recognition, whispers of my name and reputation drifting like smoke through the hall. For the first time, I saw it. The balance of power shifting, the illusion cracking wide open. But Amanda was never one to surrender gracefully. She rose, her laugh brittle. "Do you really think that makes you one of us? Should we tell them the truth, Jennifer? That you once nearly lost everything, that your career isn't what it seems?" Her words lashed through the room, sharp and reckless. I held her gaze, my pulse steady. Pulse. The silence thickened, waiting for me to break. Then I smiled. "If you want to talk about failure," I said, my voice carrying like steel across the room, "perhaps we should talk about resilience." I clicked the remote I had concealed, and the projector behind me illuminated the wall. Charts, figures, testimonials, all proof that years ago I had taken a failing company and rebuilt it, not for profit, but for survival. I hadn't hidden my past. I had conquered it. Gasps turned to nods, nods to murmurs of approval. An investor whispered, "She saved them," and others quickly agreed. Amanda's attempt at exposure collapsed, her weapon backfiring in her hands. Desperation flickered across her features, but before she could speak again, her mother stepped in. "Enough of this performance," she snapped, her voice slicing through the air. "Our family's reputation is at stake, and you think you can parade your little victories as if they matter?" The room shifted, all eyes on her, and I knew this was the moment to end the charade. I straightened, my voice lower, colder. "Then let's speak of reputations, because while you were so busy undermining me, I uncovered something else, something not so little." I slid another file onto the table, its pages brimming with damning numbers. "This," I continued, "is documentation of the funds siphoned from your company, traced carefully back to an account in your name." The silence was suffocating. Amanda froze, her eyes darting to her mother. Investors leaned forward, shock etched into their faces. My mother-in-law's composure cracked for the first time, her lips parting in horror before she slammed the folder shut. "This is fabricated," she hissed, but her voice trembled. "No," I said softly, my smile unwavering. "This is justice." The investors exchanged looks, some already pulling out their phones, messages flying into the night. The empire she had built on manipulation began to crumble in real time. I did not gloat, though fire surged in my veins. I simply stood there, composed, my gaze steady on the woman who had orchestrated my humiliation. For weeks I had been their victim, their shadow, their placeholder. Tonight, I was their reckoning. And when I turned to leave the room, Amanda's whisper broke behind me, trembling and raw. "Mother, what have you done?" Victory is never clean. In the days following the council, the house became quieter, but not kinder. The investors had rallied behind me, their confidence in the company restored through my intervention. Amanda disappeared from gatherings, her pride shattered, and my mother-in-law locked herself away, a queen fallen from grace. Outwardly, it seemed I had won, but inside my marriage, cracks widened. Daniel no longer looked at me the same way, where once his eyes had been filled with tenderness. Now they carried something else, uncertainty, even resentment. At night he lay beside me, but felt further than ever, his silence heavier than the ornate ceilings above our bed. "You humiliated my family," he said finally one evening, his voice low. "They humiliated me first," I replied softly. "That's different," he muttered, turning away. And in that moment I understood. My triumph had made him feel small, eclipsed in his own home, his own legacy. Power was intoxicating, but its price was isolation. The whispers outside our doors grew louder. Guests no longer approached me with disdain, but with a cautious respect, even fear. Yet admiration is a lonely currency. Friends I thought I had made in the family circle withdrew, their loyalties too tangled with old bloodlines. I began to walk the corridors like a stranger in my own house. Then one morning, Daniel dropped a folded newspaper onto the breakfast table. My chest tightened as I read the headline, "Gold Digger Exposed, the Woman Behind the Mask." My photograph stared back at me, a cruel caricature of my life condensed into venomous paragraphs. They painted me as a fortune hunter who had trapped Daniel for wealth, dismissing my career and accomplishments. "This is what people believe now," Daniel said, bitterness in his tone. "Do you see what's happening to me, to us?" I stayed silent, though rage clawed at me. It wasn't just slander, it was a calculated strike. That night, I returned to my files, combing through everything I had collected, and then the pieces fell into place. The leak had not come from outsiders or disgruntled investors. It had come from inside these walls. My mother-in-law, desperate and cornered, had been the one to feed the press, sacrificing her own son's peace to destroy me. Amanda was never the mastermind. She had been a pawn, a willing one perhaps, but a pawn nonetheless. The true puppeteer had always been the woman behind the mask of gentility, the matriarch who valued her throne above all else. The realization chilled me. Every whisper, every humiliation, every carefully placed barb, it had all been orchestrated, not just to wound me, but to test me. And when I refused to break, she turned to the world outside, staining my name to ensure I could never fully belong. I confronted Amanda first, finding her in the garden, her hands clenched around the railing of the balcony. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, her face pale. "She used me," Amanda said before I could speak, her voice trembling. "All this time, I thought I was protecting the family, protecting her, but she never cared about me. I was just convenient." For a brief second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Later, in the quiet of the study, I faced my mother-in-law. She sat in her chair like a statue, her eyes sharp, unyielding. "You think you've won," she said, her tone cold. "But power is fleeting, Jennifer. The press will tear you apart. Daniel already doubts you. Soon, you'll have nothing." I stepped closer, placing the newspaper between us. If I wanted nothing, I would have walked away weeks ago. But you, I leaned forward, lowering my voice, you've built your entire life on control. And now the only thing slipping away is your son's faith in you. For the first time, her eyes flickered. It was then that I saw the truth clearly. Amanda was not my enemy, not anymore. The true enemy was this entire system, a legacy of manipulation, of masks and poison. My fight was no longer just for dignity. It was for freedom. That night, lying awake beside Daniel's restless body, I knew I had reached the edge. The game was no longer about survival, but about choice. I could expose everything, dragging her name and the family's empire into ruin. Or I could stay silent, protecting Daniel from the storm that would follow, even if it meant swallowing my own truth. The weight of that choice pressed down on me, heavier than any crown of victory. The night I decided to release the evidence, the house felt like a tomb. Silence hung heavy in the corridors, broken only by the echo of my footsteps. I gathered the documents, the recordings, the photographs, and pressed send. The files flew into the hands of journalists who had been waiting for a spark. By dawn, the illusion of the perfect family was already unraveling. Headlines screamed truths they could no longer bury: fraud, embezzlement, lies carefully cultivated for decades. I hadn't done it for vengeance. The bitterness that once consumed me had burned out, leaving only clarity. I wanted freedom, not just for me, but for anyone who had been silenced, humiliated, manipulated, and I knew the only way to break the cycle was to shatter the game completely. When the first reporters arrived at the gates, my mother-in-law's empire collapsed. Cameras captured her face as she tried to deny what the documents made undeniable. Her composure, once unshakable, cracked under the weight of flashing bulbs and relentless questions. Amanda stood beside her at first, but then quietly, she slipped away, as if realizing she had been fighting for a crown that was never hers. I walked out of that house without looking back. For the first time, I carried no fear of what they might say or do. I had my truth, and I had given it wings. In the days that followed, I became a symbol I hadn't intended to be. People reached out, not just women who had been dismissed by their in-laws, but anyone who had ever been forced into silence. My inbox overflowed with stories of betrayal and resilience. They saw in me not just scandal, but survival, not just rebellion, but rebirth. But victory came with shadows. Daniel found me in the city one evening outside the office where I had taken refuge. His face was worn, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "You destroyed them," he said, his voice breaking. "My family is in ruins." I met his gaze steadily. "Your family destroyed themselves. I only refused to be their victim." For a moment, I thought he would walk away. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice softer. "Then let me come with you. Don't leave me behind in their wreckage." The words pierced me. I had loved Daniel, even when his silence had wounded me. But love wasn't enough if it meant chaining myself to the same cycle I had fought to escape. "I can't carry you out of this," I said gently. "You have to walk out on your own." His eyes glistened, but he nodded, as though he understood. I turned away, not because I stopped caring, but because I finally cared enough for myself. Weeks passed. Amanda resurfaced in unexpected ways. I saw her one morning in a cafe, hair pulled back simply, her usual armor of glamour stripped away. She looked up and met my eyes without hostility. For once, there was no pretense, no smirk. "She controlled me too," Amanda admitted quietly. "I didn't see it until she turned on me. I thought I was protecting our family, but all I was protecting was her power." "You don't owe her anything anymore," I said. "And you don't owe any of us anything either," she replied, a sad smile tugging at her lips. In that moment, I realized Amanda wasn't my enemy anymore. She was another survivor, crawling out from under the same shadow. We parted ways without promises, but I sensed she would carve her own life, one not dictated by her mother's iron grip. That was enough. As for me, I built something new. I poured my energy into projects that mattered, advising companies that had been overlooked, championing voices silenced by power. My name became less about scandal and more about strength. Invitations came not from those who once mocked me, but from people who wanted to stand with me. I had become without intending it, a testament to resilience. One afternoon, I found myself in front of a photographer again. This time it wasn't a family portrait staged to trap me on the margins. It was for a feature about women who had transformed adversity into strength. The lights glowed warm, the camera poised. "Where would you like me?" I asked, out of habit. The photographer laughed. "Wherever you want. You're the center of this story." I stood tall, the memory of that first humiliating photo still lingering, but no longer haunting me. Once they had pushed me to the edge, hoping to erase me. Now I stepped into the frame by choice, not because someone called me forward, but because I had claimed the space myself. As the shutter clicked, I thought of all the versions of me that had led here: the silent bride, the strategist, the survivor, the woman who walked away. Each one had mattered. Each one had been necessary to create the person now standing in the light. And when the session ended, I didn't feel like I was leaving with just a photograph. I was leaving with proof that no one could ever push me out of the picture again.